Hey guys, let's talk about early modern maritime empires. We've talked about the Big Five before. I want to dig in just a little bit deeper, besides who sponsored the Big Five empires, but where did they go, and a little bit more about their empire building as they first expand, and then eventually how do they rule their empires. We're going to talk a little bit about both today as we go through here. So first of all, this is the Spanish Empire. This is the people that we've been talking about. They were not the first forerunners, the Portuguese were, but they were the biggest. So between 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue to about the 1700s, they are going to be the empire during this time period. They are going to have colonial rule through what we call the viceroyalty system. We talked about that, or we'll talk about that in the future a little bit more. But this is basically where there's a governor over the areas. They set up a governor in the colonies, and then they are able to basically rule instead of the king making all the decisions, all the laws, etc. Okay, so the viceroyalty system, and the viceroy is the governor that's in these empires. So that's what they're doing in Spain. The biggest thing you need to remember, big picture about the Spanish Empire, is they are going to focus on, despite them wanting to find gold, right? That's what they were looking for originally. They really are going to find silver. And they are going to be using a system of labor, which you're going to learn about kind of coming up, called the encomienda labor system, or the hacienda labor system. You'll see that in your notes coming up as we talk about labor systems. And then it eventually will shift, because the encomienda will be so brutal and so oppressive that people are going to write and say like how bad it was. And that is going to then cause them to switch the labor systems to what's going to be called the repartimento, which basically meant it's still coerced labor, still forced labor, but it's not like slavery. But then we talked about that and how so much of the native population is going to be killed from like indigenous or from the smallpox diseases and other things, that it's going to lead to the trafficking of Africans. But that's coming just as we start. The Spanish Empire is super, super influenced by the Roman Catholic Church. So that's super influential. Again, when we talk about our three G's, God, gold, glory, silver. But either way, those are the things that are guiding them as they start this up. Now, if you look at the map that you see in the picture, we know mostly we've been thinking of their empire in Central America. We've talked about their empire in South America. What you probably have been less familiar with is the Philippines, as we kind of look at that in just a second. Spain is going to, again, remember the whole goal of early exploration was trying to find a shortcut to the Indies. So when we're looking at the map over here, which you can't really see all the way, but if we're looking at the Indies, and we're looking at the Indian Ocean Trade Network, that's where people were trying to go. And because of these new land-based empires of the Ottomans, Safavid, Mughal, they can't get to those spice markets in the traditional ways. And so they need to be able to go a different way to get there. And so they're trying to find the shortcuts through the sea routes by going west, finding the Americas, when they were really just trying to get, again, to the Indies and to the Indian Ocean, finding those spices that are there. And so Spain will set up a colony in the Philippines. I think that's important for you to know. So when you think of Philippines today, I want you to think a lot of people in Philippines speak Spanish. A lot of them are Roman Catholic. So just kind of remembering as we look back into that image that Spain not only is in the New World, but they are also in the Philippines. Okay, so just a few things about the Spanish Empire, one of the big five. Now, the other one that we were talking about was the Portuguese. They were the early leaders. They were the ones, the front runners. Now, the big thing that we need to know is because of where they are geographically located, and them and Spain are buddies, we're going to see that they are going to have some issues, and they're probably going to go to war if they don't figure out how to set up some agreements what they're doing. And so the first major agreement that you need to know is the Treaty of Tordesillas. Don't say the L's. It's Spanish or Portuguese in this case. But the Treaty of Tordesillas is this agreement between Spain and Portugal, with even like the Pope stepping in as like a mediator and saying like, hey, here's who gets what land. And so they created this imaginary line at 370 leagues from the Cape Verde Islands. And it's saying like, hey, Spain gets everything to the west of the line and Portugal has everything to the east. So on this map you see here, basically like they have Brazil, Portuguese Brazil, have control of Brazil. And then otherwise, Portuguese are going to be more involved in Africa. So as we look at the map, so there you kind of see the blue areas, that's the Portuguese. The Portuguese are going to be very involved in the Indian Ocean because, again, they sponsor trade that rounds the Cape of Good Hope around what you see is Cape Town there, and arrives Vasco da Gama all the way to the Indian Ocean, into India, sets up trading between there. So, I mean, the Portuguese, what you should think of, yes, Brazil, but you should really be thinking about how are they setting up trade as they round Africa? Because the Portuguese really are in the Indian Ocean. That's the thing you need to remember, is where they are at. Vasco da Gama kind of paves the way for that to happen as we look at explorers. Now, they have a little bit different of an empire, and we're going to call this a trading post empire. Let me talk about the difference. So, a trading post empire, TPE, as it says here, is an empire that's very different from a colonial government where people are moving and settling and ruling. Like we saw so many Spanish move to the Americas. Now, the goal with the trading post empire is money. Okay. It is to control commerce, it is to get goods, move goods, make money from those goods. And as we talked before about Prince Henry the Navigator, he is going to be, right, royalty in Portugal that is going to establish these posts, and he opens a navigation school. But he's the one that is sponsoring, just kind of like Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. Prince Henry is the one that's really going to start them exploring, and they're going to start establishing early on in Western Africa, Western Africa, in the map here. They are going to be the ones that are going to be setting up trading posts kind of along the coast initially. Again, as trading places, as getting goods from Africa and selling goods to Africans, again, so that Portugal can make money. And again, their goal was to get into the Indian Ocean so they can get those spices and other goods that we remember from when we did our kind of project about trade routes. Now, they eventually will also, as they round the Cape, because of first Diaz, who will get to the bottom, and then Da Gama, who will make it all the way, they're going to set up new ports along the Swahili coast. And because they have this new technology, like their big ships, like gunpowder, they're going to be very successful, and people aren't going to be able to challenge them. In fact, they are going to run into many different African groups who are going to try to challenge them. But again, they have this advanced technology, which will make them very powerful. So I want you to remember the Portuguese, Brazil, yes, but also the Portuguese around the coast, trading posts across the Swahili coast in Africa or on the west coast. And again, their goal is to get to the Indian Ocean. So they're going to be very involved in that area. But they are in Brazil, so I want you to kind of like think this is going to be more Spanish-like. But they are going to set up the Viceroyalty of Brazil, and they are going to be known for sugar production. And that is their major plantation labor is going to be used here. They're going to switch to slave labor, and especially they're going to be one of the biggest places that trafficked Africans are going to be sent to work there. It's going to be absolutely brutal. We'll talk about that more this unit. But they will later find some gold mines here in Brazil when, again, everyone was wanting the gold, even though silver was really the new world good that we're seeing. This plantation labor, we're going to see sugar plantations in Brazil, and the Portuguese are going to be highly involved in that. All right, so 2 down. Let's talk about the British. If you're from the United States, like the people in my class are, this is going to be kind of one that should sound pretty familiar. So we know that they set up the original 13 colonies. There they are. You learned probably this in middle school. Now, they also have other areas where they have holdings. You don't need to write all these down, but they have a lot of places within the Caribbean, places like St. Kitts and Barbados, Antigua, and Bahamas that'll switch to the Spanish rule. That's why there's an S there. Jamaica, which will switch to his Spanish control as well. The British Virgin Islands, etc. Okay, they later are also going to set up, if we kind of go back to this, a penal colony, a prison colony in Australia. Okay, so just so that we kind of remember, they're also, again, Indian Ocean. Don't forget that people wanted to get to the Indian Ocean, and so that this is another example of that. Okay. Also, as we're looking at here, the big kind of philosophy around economics at this time is mercantilism. What is it? Like if you pause this video and you look at this picture, like what is going on in this picture? Okay, so pause the video real quick. Okay, so when you're looking here, you see that there's the queen, the mother country, if you will, like the British. And we have colonies, people who are serving them and giving them things, right? Gold and silver, food and goods, raw materials. What is mercantilism? Well, it's this. It's like colonies are giving goods to the mother country to make the mother country rich. So here's another picture that kind of goes into this. Mercantilism is economic nationalism, where you think of your nation first and you want to build a wealthy and a powerful state. Okay, this is an economic principle, and this is the name of the game right now, is mercantilism. Now, The goal is to get lots of money in the mother country's treasury, in this case, Britain, right? And you want to make sure that you have more exports than imports. We're going to see what happens in Spain is they're going to spend all their money they're getting from all that silver and they're going to buy Asian goods. That's the opposite. This is not a favorable balance of trade. But the British here are going to be trying to import less goods, but from their colonies, get lots of items that they can sell and export those finished goods. And so this is kind of what happens. This is mercantilism. You need to understand this. People say mercantilism or mercantilism, but either way, however you say this, this is the policy. And that is what the British and many of these people are doing at this time, using their colonies to get goods to make the mother country really powerful. And this is just another example of what you want to do for that. If you want to pause this and look at this, you can. Otherwise, we're going to continue on. So the British East India Company is something that you're going to hear more about as we go through Unit 4. But basically, it's a private company. It's a private trading company that's involved in trade. Okay, they raise money to sponsor their voyages by selling stock. This allows them to share the risk instead of just purely gaining money from like the monarchy, which some people did. The British East India Company lets common people, capitalists, support what they're doing by buying stock, and you share the risk because it's lots of different people, not just one person sponsoring this. And then if they make money, they share that with their stock brokers. Okay. So they receive, though, the British East India Company receives a charter from the government that they have a trading monopoly. And they basically say, you're the one company that can trade in the Indian Ocean on behalf of Britain. Okay. So they are the only ones. They're like sponsored by the government, basically, even though they're a private trading company. Also, you have the ability to declare war and make war to protect your assets and money. Okay. So this is the British East India Company. We'll also talk about the VOC, which technically stands for the Dutch, but we'll come back to that. So just so that you're aware a little bit more about the economics here. Oh, and there they are. So the Dutch. So the Dutch East India Company, the Dutch are going to set up, they're so tiny. Like think of the Netherlands. That's who the Dutch are. Very tiny. That's where modern day Amsterdam is. And they are very tiny, but they know the name of this game is mercantilism, is the ability to sell goods and make their tiny nation powerful. And so they start setting up very small colonies, if you guys can see on the map wherever the black is. But they also are doing what Portugal did, right? They're also smaller. And they set up these trading posts. And so we have Dutch trading posts, and they're also in the game. And you notice that they're very, like you can compare the Dutch and the Portuguese a lot. But we see these trading posts around here where the Dutch are getting involved in the trading game, again, to make their mother country rich, to get these resources to make this tiny nation of the Netherlands super powerful. Okay, so when we're looking here, the Dutch East India Company is very similar to the British East India Company in that they started a joint stock company, which again is going to be engaged really heavily, right? Really heavily in the Indian Ocean primarily. Like again, if we're zooming in and you look again at this Dutch East Indies, they do set up a colony. And again, they have a lot of the power because they have the Strait of Malacca that they're controlling now. The Dutch, again, tiny Netherlands, they set this up. Okay. So going deeper on our big five, we want to know where did they set up their empires, right? Not just who supported them. That was our first thing when we were looking at like 4.1 and 4.2 in our unit. We were saying like, how did they get here? How did the technology allow them? Who sponsored them? But then really, how are they expanding their empire? So I would make sure you know these big five, know where they established their colonies, how they did that, if they were more like settler colonies, which you see more in the Spanish, or are they more trading posts like we saw with the Dutch and the Portuguese? And again, where are the colonies in here? So be able to name them. I would write down specifically for the Dutch, the Cape Colony at the bottom of South Africa, as well as understanding like in Indonesia, they have set up kind of control as a colony. So those are the big things you need to know. And I almost forgot the French. I'm sorry, French. Leaving you behind. The French, guys. The French are going to be involved as well. As we talked about in class, they're going to set up an empire, basically colonies in Canada and Nova Scotia and Quebec. Lots of French speaking there. The Mississippi River all the way down, right, to Louisiana. We see the French influence there. And they're going to set up one colony that's really important for our class, and that's Haiti or Saint-Domingue. Okay, so that's going to be a really big deal. As we fast forward and we get into the new units, we are going to talk about how the British and French not only are fighting back in Europe, but will be fighting in the Americas, which is going to be kind of really important as we looked at these conflicting economic interests, these mercantilism, right? These mercantile interests of who has power over what resources, especially in North America. Okay. So they're going to fight with each other in something called the French and Indian War, where it was the French and native people, the indigenous people. They got along way better than the British and the native people. But we're going to see the French and Indian War, and they're going to fight against the British. The French are going to lose. And that is going to make the British start gaining more power, but they also is going to lead to the American Revolution. We're going to talk more about that, which will then French are going to lose more lands to what will become the United States. So there's our big five. Sorry, France, I kind of forgot you. You're important, really. Okay, so there's the big five, the things you need to know of our major 5 early modern maritime empires. I hope that's helpful. Have a great weekend, or whenever you're watching this. We'll talk.